Imagine the Middle Ages. The Church genuinely believes that demons don't just visit you at night to tempt you. They can conceive children, but here's the craziest part: they lacked the flesh of their own to do it. They needed human seed, and they knew how to get it. In this documentary investigation, we will uncover how these terrifying creatures, the succubus and the incubus, were born thousands of years ago in Mesopotamian myths. How great theologians like Thomas Aquinas developed an incredible doctrine about their ability to reproduce. And how this belief led to the horrifying witch hunts across Europe. Prepare to delve into a world where the line between nightmare and reality was blurred, because what you are about to hear will forever change your understanding of things that go bump in the night. Imagine this: you wake up in the middle of the night. The room is bathed in pre-dawn gloom, but you can't move. An invisible weight crushes your lungs, every breath is a struggle. An icy chill runs down your spine, and shadows flicker at the edge of your vision, seeming to take shape. You try to scream, but no sound escapes your throat. This isn't just a nightmare, it's an ancient, soul-chilling experience. For our ancestors, living long before the age of science, such an experience was irrefutable proof. The veil between the world of the living and the realm of shadows was terrifyingly thin, and these nightly visitors were not figments of imagination, but a frightening reality. The very first, faint whispers of these nocturnal entities reach us from the heart of ancient Mesopotamia. Around 2300 BC, when Sumerian scribes etched their cuneiform signs into wet clay, beliefs in terrifying night spirits already existed. Among them, the Lilith and the Ardat Lily stood out. These were not mere abstract myths, but specific, horrifying female spirits of the night whose touch brought misfortune. Their purpose: to attack men, draining their life force and causing illness, and to creep up on children, spreading fear and infertility. These ancient legends, recorded on clay tablets yellowed by time, became the archetypal foundation for the image of the succubus, a seductive yet deadly nocturnal temptress whose presence meant inevitable doom. Let's journey forward millennia and thousands of kilometers to the west, to the majestic cities of ancient Greece and Rome, where philosophy, mythology, and their own versions of nightmares reigned. Between 1500 BC and 500 AD, amidst marble columns and mysterious ruins, the people of the ancient world encountered a phenomenon they called the Ephialtes. These were not just dream demons. They were entities believed to literally leap upon the chest of a sleeping person. Imagine the sensation of paralysis, suffocation, a weight pressing down so hard that every breath is a fight. This terrifying experience, which we now know as sleep paralysis, was then explained as a supernatural invasion. The Ephialtes became an early, frightening precursor to the incubus male demons, not necessarily focused on seduction, but certainly on suppression and oppression. Their arrival meant not just a bad dream, but a real intrusion capable of exhausting both body and mind. But perhaps the most significant and influential evolution of the nocturnal demon occurred within Jewish tradition, particularly between the 5th and 7th centuries AD. It was here that the ancient Mesopotamian whispers of the Lilith took on a new, powerful, and tragic form. According to some rabbinic texts and folk legends, Lilith was not just an outside demoness, but Adam's first wife. Imagine, created from the same earth as he was, Lilith refused to submit, refused to lie beneath him, insisting on equality. When Adam rejected her claim, she spoke the ineffable name of God, ascended into the air, and left Eden forever. Her rebellion transformed her. From a spurned wife, she became a vengeful, powerful demoness whose fury was directed against humanity, especially men and children. Lilith became the one who seduces men in their sleep, draining their life force, and abducts infants, particularly boys, as a form of revenge. This image of Lilith as Adam's first, defiant wife turned into a nocturnal temptress and soul stealer had a colossal, truly defining influence on the formation of the succubus concept. She became the embodiment of a demonic feminine power, possessing not only a seductive but also a destructive nature that still echoes in myths and legends today. These ancient narratives, born from humanity's primal fears of the unknown, of darkness, and of inexplicable experiences in sleep, laid the foundational stones. They didn't just explain nightmares, they created an entire mythology of unseen entities capable of piercing our reality. From the sun-scorched plains of Mesopotamia to the grand temples of Greece, and the burgeoning religious traditions of ancient Israel, the seeds of belief in succubi and incubi were sown and began to sprout. The stage was set for these shadows to evolve, adapt, and ultimately capture the imaginations and fears of entire continents. These early beliefs became the cornerstone for the later, more complex theological doctrines that would define the medieval understanding of these entities, turning nocturnal whispers into central figures in a grand cosmic battle for human souls. Next, we will see how these ancient fears were transformed into theological treatises that not only acknowledged the existence of demons, but also attempted to explain their incredible ability to interact with the human world, including the possibility of siring offspring. It was this very drive to comprehend the incomprehensible, to explain nocturnal terrors and visions, that led the ancient whispers of night demons to take on a new form in an era when Christianity was firmly established. While in antiquity they were mere nightmares or mischievous forest spirits, the new faith recast these beings not just as elements of folklore, but as weapons in the hands of far more powerful forces. In the late 4th and early 5th centuries, St. Augustine of Hippo, one of the greatest thinkers of early Christianity, could not ignore this topic in his monumental work, The City of God. He acknowledged that common rumor and contemporary testimonies spoke of certain incubi, he called them fauns, who have often assaulted women and sought and obtained intercourse with them. For Augustine, whose theological mind strove for order and truth, the fact of such attacks was undeniable. However, he shrewdly questioned their ability to truly procreate. For him, it was an act that mimicked creation but lacked divine blessing and genuine life. This was a crucial step, one that allowed the existence of these entities to be accepted while keeping them outside the divine order, casting them as mere imitators and deceivers. As centuries passed, in the grim labyrinth of the Middle Ages, these beliefs only grew stronger. Exhausted by fasting and prayer, monks, whose cells were lit only by the pale, ghostly light of the moon, became ideal targets. The belief that succubi and incubi visited people in their sleep became pervasive. These demons came to the sleeping, and their favorite targets were not just laity, but precisely monks and pious individuals, those whose souls were most valuable in the battle for salvation. Picture it, the cold walls of a monastery, the air thick with incense and old books, and a lone figure lost in sleep. And suddenly, into this fragile world, something alien intrudes. The goal of these nocturnal visitors was singular, to tempt a person to the sin of the flesh, even if their body was ravaged by asceticism. They caused nightly pollutions, which were shaming and undermined spiritual purity, draining not only the body but also the soul. Testimonies from that time often describe the touch of these demons as something horrific, like an icy needle piercing them to the bone. It was not just a touch, but a deep, gut-wrenching sensation that left behind a trail of unbearable cold and exhaustion. This icy touch in a dream was often accompanied by a feeling of pressure on the chest, suffocation, and the inability to move, the very phenomenon we now call sleep paralysis. People would wake up in a cold sweat, their hearts pounding with terror, their bodies enfeebled as if all life force had been sucked out of them. This was no mere dream, it was a targeted assault on the very essence of a human being. Their primary objective was multifaceted, but always led to damnation. First and foremost, they sought to lead a person into sin, especially lust, which was considered one of the gravest offenses. But their mission didn't end there. With each visit, with every stolen drop of life force, they depleted the soul and body of their victim. people would fall ill, lose their minds, and descend into madness. These nocturnal attacks were just the beginning of a path that, according to medieval theologians, led either to the complete damnation of the soul or, even more terrifyingly, to a pact with the devil himself. The demons of dreams were not just sexual predators. They were instruments of darkness, laying a systematic siege on the human soul, destroying it from within, step by step, until it was entirely in the thrall of infernal forces. But among all the nightmarish aspects of their visits, one thought particularly disturbed theologians, and common folk alike: the unholy idea of conception, the possibility that these demonic entities could sire children. It seemed impossible. How could bodiless spirits create life? And yet, for centuries, folk tales whispered of children born from such unions, and the Church was faced with the need to explain this terrifying phenomenon. It was in the 13th century that the great theologian Thomas Aquinas, in his monumental Summa Theologica, presented a doctrine designed to reconcile theology with widespread superstitions. Aquinas acknowledged that demons, being incorporeal spirits, could not naturally conceive offspring. They had no flesh and, therefore, no physical capacity for reproduction. However, the cunning of the devil and his minions was limitless. Here is how, according to Aquinas and later demonologists, this sinister cycle was performed. First, a demon would appear to a man in the guise of a succubus, a seductive woman, often in a dream, but sometimes in waking life, luring him to the point of ejaculation. Once the seed was collected, this same demon would undergo a horrific transformation. It would change its form, shifting from a succubus into an incubus, a powerful, often frightening male figure. Then, using the collected human seed, this incubus would copulate with a woman, impregnating her. Thus, the child born from this act was not truly demonic in the sense of being the direct offspring of a spirit. But the conception itself was diabolically orchestrated, and its origin was unholy. This mechanism, detailed not only by Aquinas, but also codified in works like the infamous Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches in 1487, became a cornerstone of medieval demonology. This doctrine allowed for an explanation of stories about children born to unknown fathers or with inexplicable anomalies, all while preserving the theological concept of demons as incorporeal beings. From the 15th to the 17th centuries, the term Cambion became widely used to describe such children. The word comes from the Old French Cambion, literally meaning a changeling, a child believed to have been swapped with a human infant. Belief in changelings was widespread, especially when a child was born with physical deformities, mental disabilities, or exhibited unusual behavior, crying incessantly, demanding too much food, or failing to thrive. Medieval illustrations we see often depict this nightmarish metamorphosis of the demon, as well as gruesome scenes of the switch, where sinister figures swap sleeping human babies for something else pale, abnormal, with features that betray its alien origin. Cambions were believed to bear the mark of their demonic conception. They were often described as having physical or mental abnormalities, deformities, a strange pallor, unnaturally large eyes. But even more frightening was the belief that they could possess supernatural abilities, to curse, inflict disease, wield dark magic, or simply display an inexplicable cruelty and malice from a very young age. Their soul, though human in essence, was deeply corrupted by the act of its conception. They were sometimes described as unnaturally cold to the touch, consistent with the popular notions of the icy touch of succubi and incubi. Thus, if the visits of succubi and incubi were a direct assault on a person's soul, the creation of Cambions represented the demon's attempt to anchor their influence in the physical world, siring offspring that could serve them in their dark designs. This concept deeply terrified people, adding another layer of horror to the already grim beliefs about their nightly guests. But fear without structure is like a wildfire. It burns everything in its path but offers no answers. People needed more than just terrifying stories. They needed to understand how to fight this invisible enemy, how to distinguish a victim from an accomplice, and, most importantly, how to eradicate the evil. And then, as if by diabolical design, on the cusp of the 15th century, the world received its ultimate tool for this battle, a book that turned ancient superstitions into dogma, nightmares into criminal offenses, and the innocent into heretics. In 1487, two German Dominican inquisitors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, published a work that would forever change the history of Europe, Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches. This was not just a treatise, but a veritable judicial handbook for witch hunting, systematizing all the demonological beliefs that had been accumulating for centuries. Whereas tales of Lilith, the Ephialtes, or even Augustine's fauns were once scattered fragments of folklore and theological doctrine, they were now fused into a single, terrifyingly logical system. The Hammer of Witches transformed succubi and incubi from ghostly seducers into central figures in a diabolical conspiracy. They were no longer mere nocturnal visitors causing sleep paralysis or fear. They were agents of the devil, the key to forging a pact with him. The book detailed how these demons seduced people, especially women whom the authors considered more susceptible to temptation, into sexual unions, which was automatically equated with heresy and a renunciation of God. This was not just a sin of the flesh, but an act of blasphemy, a conscious servitude to the forces of darkness. The mechanism for creating cambions, which Thomas Aquinas had tried to explain theologically in the 13th century, was now codified and became grounds for accusation. Malleus Maleficarum asserted that a succubus did indeed collect a man's seed, then, transforming into an incubus, used it to impregnate a woman, siring offspring that could have demonic traits or serve Satan. These changelings, or cambions, whose concept became widespread in the 15th-17th centuries, became yet another horrifying proof of demonic influence in the physical world. Engravings from the Hammer of Witches itself and other demonological treatises of the time vividly depicted these horrific union scenes of inquisitorial trials where the unfortunate were accused of congress with demons and the torture used to wrench out confessions. The influence of the Hammer of Witches cannot be overstated. It became a bestseller of its time, reprinted dozens of times, and served as a manual for inquisitors, judges, and ordinary priests across Europe. The book's authority was so great that it lent legitimacy to the most monstrous accusations, fueling the mass hysteria of the witch hunts that gripped the continent for centuries. The atmosphere of paranoia and fear depicted in the engravings of the era, where shadows lurked in every corner and any unusual mark could be interpreted as the devil's seal, became a daily reality. It was during this period that the succubus and incubus were definitively cemented as direct, ruthless instruments of the devil. Their goal was not just to instill fear, but to drag human souls into the abyss of heresy, blasphemy, and damnation. The visits of these demons ceased to be mere nightmares. They became hard evidence in inquisitorial courts, harbingers of the pyre and the rack. The medieval belief that they drained life force, caused disease, and madness now had a scientific basis, prescribed in this grim treatise. The Hammer of Witches not only systematized terror, but gave it legal force, turning entire towns into fortresses of superstition where every whisper, every strange dream, could be the beginning of the end. Now, if you saw them in your dreams, it was no longer just an assault on your body, it was a direct path to the stake. But what if the fires of the stake were fueled not by demonic flame, but by a terror born in the deepest corners of the human mind? The shadows that had haunted sleepers for centuries, taking the form of incubi and succubi, only gained their terrifying reality because people were desperately trying to explain the unexplainable. Today, we have a far more precise, though no less unsettling, explanation for those nocturnal visits. It's called sleep paralysis. Imagine you're waking up in the middle of the night or just drifting off. Your brain is already alert, but your body refuses to obey. You try to scream, to move, but you can't even twitch a finger. The world around you seems real, yet distorted. And then, the truly terrifying part begins. Someone is in the room. You sense a presence, feel a weight on your chest as if something invisible is sitting on you, and you hear whispers or eerie sounds. The entire room fills with panic and a primal, visceral horror. For our ancestors who faced this, the answer was obvious. An incubus or succubus was upon you. This is precisely how the ancient Greeks explained the attacks of their ephults, the nightmare demons who leapt upon sleepers, causing suffocation and paralysis. It was their scientific explanation for the same condition that, centuries later in the Middle Ages, would be attributed to demonic seducers. Visuals, stylized graphics of sleep phases fading to black. Transition to the silhouette of a sleeping person with a shadow looming over them, then a shot of their face contorted in fear. An effect conveying the weight on their chest. But modern science, of course, has debunked this myth, though it hasn't made the experience any less terrifying. Sleep paralysis is a state where a person is on the threshold between sleep and wakefulness. Normally, when we fall asleep and enter REM sleep, our muscles are temporarily paralyzed to prevent us from acting out our dreams. Sometimes, this off switch gets out of sync with the brain. The body is still paralyzed, but consciousness has already returned. The brain, caught in this liminal state, fills in the perceptual gaps with vivid, often frightening hallucinations, while the feeling of pressure on the chest is simply the physiological sensation of the rib cage being unable to move freely. It's pure physiology and psychology, with no pact with the devil or act of seduction required. Visuals, calmer, almost clinical images of a sleeping brain, neural pathways, then a schematic depiction of a person aware of their paralysis, but without demonic figures. However, even after science unmasked the true nature of these nocturnal visitors, their shadows did not vanish. Over centuries, the stories of succubi and incubi became deeply embedded in the collective unconscious. They evolved from mere demons into archetype symbols of forbidden desire, temptation, danger, and a sexuality that can enslave or destroy. And that is precisely why, despite all the neurophysiological explanations, the images of succubi and incubi continue to live and thrive in modern culture. Think of literature, from Gothic novels, where femme fatales anticipated the succubus archetype, to modern fantasy, where they have become entire races embodying dark elegance and temptation. In film and television, succubi and incubi appear in a wide range of genres, from horror, where they instill fear, to erotic thrillers, where they play on our hidden fantasies. They have become an integral part of fantasy universes, whether as seductive demonesses in Diablo or vampiric beings in the world of The Witcher, where their nature always balances on the edge of mysticism and biology. Visuals, a dynamic montage of clips from movies, games, book covers, and art featuring succubus, incubus-inspired imagery. Ranging from classic and dark to modern and stylized, their allure lies in this very duality. They are dangerous yet irresistible. They are born of darkness, but often possess a blinding beauty. They explore our liminal states of consciousness, sleep, desire, fear. Even in music, especially in heavy metal, goth, and electronic genres, you can find compositions inspired by their dark aesthetic and mysterious power. Their cold touch, once attributed to demons, is now associated with the metaphorical coldness of detached, dangerous beauty or a hollow seduction. Thus, the succubus and incubus have survived the Inquisition, the scientific revolution, and the Age of Enlightenment. They have transformed from objects of religious terror into complex archetypes that help us explore the deepest, and often most unsettling aspects of the human psyche. Our hidden desires, our fears of the unknown, and our vulnerability in sleep. Their story is not so much a history of demons as it is a history of ourselves, of how we have tried to explain the inexplicable, projected our fears and desires onto external forces, and how these ancient shadows continue to haunt us through the ages, even after their demonic nature has been exposed. Because some mysteries, even when solved, retain their intriguing, almost erotic, and dark mystique. From ancient superstitions to the grim doctrines of the Middle Ages, and finally to scientific understanding, the story of the succubus and incubus is not just a tale of demons, but a profound portrait of the human consciousness. It is an odyssey of our drive to explain the inexplicable, to project our innermost fears and desires onto external forces, turning nocturnal whispers into powerful archetypes. If science has debunked their demonic nature, why do these shadows continue to haunt us, seeping into the most hidden corners of our culture? What does this say about that invisible line between reality and fantasy, where our fears and desires take on their most bizarre forms? Share your thoughts in the comments. What ancient shadows still linger in your subconscious? Hit the like button if this deep dive into history captivated you, and subscribe to the channel to continue our journey through the labyrinths of the human mind and its enduring mysteries.